Hey you guys, and welcome back to another one of my videos. If you're new here, my name is Holly and thank you so much for watching. Before I get into this video, I wanted to quickly give a shout out to my little earrings. They're little vodka bottles today, which I thought was so cute, and they're from my friend's business, which is called the Aurora Collective, and I will link her down below. She has heaps of cute little earrings and candles and like a whole bunch of other stuff, scrunchies and whatnot. So give her a look if you want to support a small business. I know she would really appreciate it and I would really appreciate it too for her. But let's get into today's case. Today I wanted to do the case of Roger Dean and the Quakers Hill nursing home fire. I found it particularly interesting because I've mentioned this before, but I work in aged care, and so I feel like it almost gave me, I don't know, I just really felt for these residents because I don't work in a residential facility where people live, but I've been into quite a few. I know what they're normally like, and it's just so sad. This case is just so sad. But without further ado, let's get into it. So to understand what happened in this case, we need to backtrack a little bit. In fact, all the way back to 1976, as this was the year that Roger Dean was born. He was born in Vietnam, and when he was a really little baby, him and his 3 siblings fled Vietnam with his mom to come and try and live a better life in Australia. His father actually stayed in Vietnam at the time and was going to come at a later date. I'm not sure why, but that was just the plan. But unfortunately, his father actually died in Vietnam before he got the chance to come to Australia. Vietnam in the late 70s and 80s wasn't the best place to be. In fact, it was pretty dangerous. There was a lot of conflict going on there. The communist regime that took over after the war basically made a lot of bad decisions that resulted in a poor economy, decimated food supply, and just the general quality of life over there was just significantly reduced. And yeah, like I said, because of this, Dean actually grew up in Sydney, Australia with his mum and his siblings. Now, Dean and his family didn't grow up with a lot of money, but they had enough to survive, and his upbringing was a pretty reasonable, ordinary upbringing, as much as one can be when you don't have a father figure. I think that Dean struggled with this quite a lot, especially in his younger years. When he was pretty young, he actually realized that he was gay. Being gay in the 80s wasn't exactly the easiest thing in Australia. A lot of people were really against gay people and didn't accept them, and Dean found that in his school he was actually really badly bullied because he was gay, and also at home his own mother didn't accept the fact that he was gay, and it meant that he had a really strained relationship with her and also with his siblings. And I just want to say, I can't even imagine how hard it would be to be gay and just have people not support you. I don't know, it just makes me sad that his family didn't accept him for who he was. Dean didn't have very many friends either, and I think a lot of the time he really felt quite isolated growing up. Despite all of this, he was really smart, and in 1996 he graduated from uni, the Uni of Sydney to be exact, and he graduated with a Bachelor of Nursing degree. After Roger Dean got this degree, he went on to work in St George's Hospital in community health services and drug and alcohol rehabilitation, which is actually quite ironic, as you'll learn later on in this case. But he worked there for a while. He worked there all the way up until 2007 when he resigned after having an argument with his supervisor, who was named Tracy Sheen. I'm not sure on the specifics of the argument, but I know that it came about after some notes that Dean had made on a patient's file. For whatever reason, Tracy had pulled him up on them, but Roger felt like she was treating him unfairly. And not long after this argument, Tracy found her car in the staff car park with white paint all over it. it and nails in the tires. She obviously notified her manager about this incident, whose name was Joanna Townley, and together they both realized that this is a pretty serious incident. I mean, it is not common for you to go to your car and find that it is literally, you know, has paint and like screws in the tires. It's a pretty serious thing. So they decided to investigate this further, but strangely enough, at the same time, Roger Dean decided to resign. But Joanna Townley at the time did notice that there were white paint marks at Roger Dean's desk that sort of matched the paint marks that were on the car. So they, you know, they had reason to suspect him of doing this to Tracy's car. But like I said, once he resigned, the investigation didn't really go anywhere. It sort of just fizzled out. From around 2005 to this time in 2007, Roger Dean had actually also been working casually at the St John of God Hospital. But when he resigned from the St George Hospital, he ended up taking on a permanent position at the St John of God Hospital, and there he was an RN who did mainly night shifts. He was also part-time studying a Bachelor of Law, which he'd been doing since about 2004. So he had a lot on his plate, and he was, you know, a smart guy. Sadly though, Roger Dean actually had a bit of a drug problem himself, and on the 18th of June 2011 he was seen at work showing signs of being drug affected. Roger did a lot of night shifts, like I said, so a lot of the time he wasn't necessarily working with a lot of other staff. It was actually a resident at the facility who raised the alarm on Roger, as she reported to other staff members that he wasn't able to administer her meds correctly, and she was really concerned about this. You know, I mean, as you would be, but the fact was the meds were literally written down on a piece of paper in front of Roger. So it wasn't even the fact that he couldn't remember to administer them, it was the fact that he literally didn't even, you know, he wasn't even capable of getting the right amounts at the time. And thank goodness this lady obviously didn't have severe dementia or anything like that, because she was able to realize that he couldn't give her the correct meds, and she was able to tell other staff members. The resident had also said that Roger Dean's clothes appeared like really disheveled. He had white froth coming from around his mouth, and his speech was really slurred, and he was speaking really slowly as well. A lady by the name of Miss Karen Bailey was the after hours nurse who spoke to the concerned resident, and she immediately went to Roger to have a little bit of a chat with him. She herself said that Roger did appear drug affected, and she decided to send him home straight away, telling him that it was best if he got a cab rather than drive home, just because of the state that he was in. You know, she knew that he wasn't right and it wouldn't be safe for him to drive himself home. Because of this incident, Dean was suspended, and a few days later on the 21st he had to have an interview. This was with Mr. Paul Dyer, who was the director of nursing for the hospital, and Kathy Bond, the nurse unit manager. At this interview, Dean told them that he suffered from bipolar disorder and that his doctor had recently changed his antidepressant meds, which was the reason for him seeming drug affected. Kathy and Paul asked Dean to bring in a letter from his doctor confirming this, and Dean did. Interestingly enough though, on the letter that he brought in from his doctor stated that yes, he did suffer from depression and anxiety, but his doctor had never treated him for bipolar. His doctor also said that he thought that Roger Dean was well fit enough to go back to work. So he did, but Kathy and Paul decided it was probably best to put him on day shifts when he started back up, because it meant that he could be around a lot of other people and watched more closely. And so not long after Roger returned to his day shifts at the St John of God Hospital, he actually resigned. Fast forward to early September of 2011, and Roger Dean needed a new job. You know, he just quit his last one and he was looking for something new, but in the same sort of field. That's when he noticed that there was a position going for an RN for night shifts at the Quakers Hill nursing home. This home was owned by the Domain Principal Group, who not long after changed their name to Opal Care. So that is why you'll never see Domain Principal Group as like aged care facilities anymore. This home that Roger had applied at was a residential facility, and it could accommodate for up to 100 residents at a time. At the time that Roger started, it only had about 81 residents there. Interestingly, when Dean submitted his resume to the the Quakers Hill nursing home, he took off his resume the work that he had done at St. John of God Hospital, and instead for that time period he said that he had been working at a cheesecake shop. Now, something that I haven't mentioned until now is that Roger Dean actually had a boyfriend who was called Dean, who owned a cheesecake shop in Quakers Hill. And so yeah, Roger just said that he worked there for the last few years, and that was who he had as his reference for the last few years. He also gave a list of referees for aged care as well, but like I said, he hadn't included his work at the St. John of God Hospital, and in fact he hadn't included any aged care work since about 2001 with referees. So the referees that were on there were from literally 10 years prior. But in the end, this didn't even matter because the Quakers Hill nursing home didn't even bother checking referees, and Roger was pretty much hired straight away. Now, I want to say here that they did do a criminal background check and all of those things, but yeah, the referees were never checked. And the fact that Quakers Hill did this came under a lot of scrutiny later on, as I'm sure you can imagine. But the thing is, and I'm not justifying what they did, but the thing about aged care is all across the board, aged care facilities are understaffed. The staff are underpaid, the working conditions aren't always necessarily that great, and I feel bad saying this, but it's honestly with residential facilities just the truth of the matter. So yeah, I'm not justifying what Quakers Hill did, but I can totally understand that they would have just needed staff, especially those night shifts. Not a lot of people want to do those night shifts, even though they are that little bit extra pay. Not a lot of people want to be awake from 10:30 at night till 7 in the morning, you know, working. But anyways, within a couple of days, by mid-September of 2011, Roger had been put on the roster on a permanent part-time basis as a RN, which is a registered nurse, and he was doing those night shifts. Night shifts at Quakers Hill only needed one registered nurse per night, and the registered nurse was the nurse that had the keys and was in control of S8 medications. Now, S8 meds, or Schedule 8 medications, are basically the medications that are considered highly addictive, and this is why those medications are locked away, so that people can't easily access them and abuse them. They're usually pain meds and whatnot. They're usually meds like morphine, codeine, phosphate, and oxycodone, as well as hydromorphine, pethidine, and methadone. So these are pretty serious meds that'll really get you knocked out if you ever need to use them when you're in pain. So like I said, these meds were in a locked room in a locked box with only one key that could give you access to these meds, and the only person in the facility who could access these meds at night was the RN. And as we all know, the RN that was on at night was Roger Dean. Now, I want to talk here quickly a little bit about the layout of this nursing home. So like I said, this home at the time when Roger was working there had about 81 residents within it. It was in like an H shape, and if I can find photos I will include them here, but it was like an H-shaped facility, and most of the rooms were shared rooms. So this meant that up to 4 individuals could be living within one room at this facility. Many of these residents were frail and unable to take care of themselves, and some were even bedridden. A lot of these residents had dementia also. There were different wings to the facility, and at the time in 2011 it was not a government regulation for there to be a sprinkler system within the facility. And on top of this, the building also only had one fire hydrant, so you know, they weren't very well equipped for fires. A couple months go by and it's November 16th of 2011. Roger Dean had been working that night shift, which took him into the morning of November 17th. Other staff had noticed that On this shift, Roger Dean had been spending a lot of time within that locked meds room, and it was concerning to them. One staff member in particular, called Miss Darley, decided to go into the meds room to see what was going on. Now, I don't know how she got into the meds room. It wasn't quite clear, but I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. What matters is that she went in there and what she saw was even further suspicious. Roger Dean was in there with a whole bunch of Webster packs that had been taped up, or blister packs I should say. Really, I always call them Webster packs, but a lot of people get confused because Webster pack is like a brand name for these things, but like the generic name is blister pack. But either way, these are just packs where meds are popped into little different sections, and the reason that these are commonly used is because it is a great way of making sure that meds are correctly labeled and dated, and it's just a good way to reduce medication errors. But like I said, she noticed that these packs had been punctured and then retaped, and she asked Roger Dean about it. She asked him what was going on, why they had been punctured, and Roger just said that another nurse had accidentally punctured holes in all the blister packs. Obviously a very clumsy nurse, and he was the one that then went and re-taped them all up. Now, Miss Darley was pretty switched on, and she felt like Roger Dean's story just didn't really add up. He was spending a lot of time in that meds room, and on top of that, all the blister packs with the strongest pain meds were the ones that happened to all be punctured. She voiced her concerns to some other staff, but like I said before, it's always really busy in residential aged care, and it was also the middle of the night, so she couldn't really do too much. She couldn't really contact her manager at that point, so she just went on with her work. Roger completed his shift in the early hours of the 17th of November, and then he went home to rest so that he could come back and do another shift that night at around 10:30 p.m. Now, at around 8 p.m. that night, before Roger was due to come back into work, the daily audit of the Schedule 8 meds was completed by another RN by the name of Jeanette Mitchell. This audit each night was written into one of two little blue meds books, and then it would be signed off by a witness. So it was never just the RN doing the audit, but they were the one responsible, and then another staff member would be there also witnessing it and signing off. You know, again, just to reduce people taking advantage of these strong meds. That night though, Jeanette realized that the count wasn't adding up. There was over 200 tablets of endone missing, and also 1 tablet of Kapanol, and so she was really concerned. This was a pretty big deal. She had never in her 10 plus years of working there ever had meds go missing, and she decided to raise the alarm. She actually ended up contacting police after contacting her supervisor that night, but for whatever reason she didn't tell the police that she had strong suspicions of a certain staff member being the culprit. She had suspicions of Roger because she'd contacted other RNs that had been working, you know, around the clock, and none of them had mentioned anything about using, you know, all those strong meds or anything being off. And just due to past behavior by Roger, she felt like there was potential that he was the one involved. And this was actually confirmed because at about 10:15 that night, so before Roger got there, other staff members came in who were staff members who had also worked that previous night, and they told her about how he'd been acting really sus and spent a lot of time in the meds room. In fact, he'd spent over 2 hours in the meds room. And one staff member even recalled how they had heard a lot of blister packs popping from the meds room that night when Roger had been in there. You know, when supposedly another nurse had accidentally broken all those blister packs. It wasn't looking too good for our friend Roger Dean. And it was starting to get closer to 10:30 that night when Roger would start his shift. Jeanette had told staff to keep this info about the missing meds from Roger because she just didn't want him to find out and, you know, potentially freak out, especially because the police were due to come. One staff member though, and I swear there's always one, missed the memo, and they actually told Roger when he got there that police were due to come because there was a whole bunch of missing tablets. And as I'm sure you can imagine, Roger freaked out. He was absolutely panicked, and he knew at this point that it was only a matter of time before he was caught. The police rocked up just after midnight, and honestly they didn't seem too concerned about the whole situation. Jeanette failed to notify police that the person that she was most suspicious of was actually working there at the time. He was actually the one who let the police in. Like, Dean was literally the one who let the police in. But yeah, for whatever reason, Jeanette didn't tell the police this, and they left pretty soon after they got there. They sort of looked around a little bit, but said that they had other calls that they needed to attend to which were more important, and so they left. They said though that they would return, and if they couldn't, they would give Jeanette a call to let her know. At this point, Jeanette then decided to check the CCTV from the previous night, and although there was no camera within the meds room, there was one pretty much straight at the door of where the meds room was. And so she checked this one, and on the CCTV footage she could see that Roger Dean had been walking in and out of that meds room multiple times throughout his shift, and even at one point he exited the meds room with something sort of tucked under his shoulder. She couldn't quite work out what it was, but there was no reason that he would need to go into the meds room and bring anything at all out. At 2 a.m. though, the police still hadn't come back or called, so Jeanette decided to give them a call herself. And this is the point where she told police that Roger Dean was the person that she suspected of taking these meds. She also told the police that he was working there and staff were concerned about their safety because he was working there, but the police didn't seem too concerned. They said that they were going to come back in the morning when managers were there because they were too busy to deal with it at that point in time. Jeanette also called her supervisor to let her know that staff were scared and they didn't want to be left alone with Roger Dean, but neither Jeanette or the supervisor told Roger to go home. And Jeanette's supervisor actually said to Jeanette, I quote, "The other staff are adults, so they are capable of taking care of themselves." So Jeanette herself also decided to leave, even though staff were literally begging her to stay again because they didn't feel safe. She was tired and didn't feel like the police or her supervisor was that concerned, so she left too. Roger, like I said, was not sent home. He just continued to work, and he was absolutely panicking. He realized that he needed to cause a distraction if there was any chance that he was gonna get away with this, and so that's what he did. So at about 10 to 5 in the morning of the 18th of July, Roger Dean set fire to a bed in a vacant room with a lighter that he had stolen from another one of his co-workers. This fire that was lit set off the fire indicator panel, which in turn sent out a notification to various firefighting facilities, who sent various firefighters out to the scene. Now, the thing is, in these residential facilities, a lot of the time there will be false alarms. So people will send out fire trucks, but they won't necessarily send out a lot of fire trucks. They'll just send out one because, like I said, they normally think it'll be a false alarm. So the two places that sent out fire trucks just sent out one fire truck each. Then at 5:05 a.m, Dean helped a resident go to the bathroom. The resident was in a room that was shared with 3 other people, and while that resident was in the bathroom, Dean set their bed alight. He then left the room where the 3 other residents were sleeping and made sure to keep the door open. Fire basically needs oxygen to grow, and if you leave a door open, you're gonna obviously get more oxygen, which in turn will create a bigger fire. And I think Dean knew this when he left. The second fire again set off that fire indicator panel, which meant that another 4 fire trucks came to the scene. I don't know if you guys know much about fire, but it travels very, very quickly, and by 5:15 a.m, the roof of the A1 wing was starting to collapse. Residents were being dragged out of the building. Like I said, a lot of these residents were unable to even walk properly, and so motorists were were being flagged down to help because there just wasn't enough manpower to get all of these 81 people out of this building quickly. Staff tried to wheel out some residents in their bed, but they found the exit ramp was like a 90-degree angle, and it also had metal bars on each side, so it meant that at a certain point you couldn't push the beds any further because they were literally just too big to get around this turn. In the end, a lot of residents were dragged out wrapped up in sheets. Now you might be wondering where Roger Dean was within all of this. He was literally at the staff's side, also trying to evacuate the residents. At almost 5:30, the firefighters were still trying to get the fire under control. There had been issues with getting a hose working, but by 5:40, thankfully, the fire was finally under control. Multiple police and ambulance were at the scene by this point, and at 6 a.m, it was confirmed that sadly 3 residents had died on scene. A further 8 residents passed away later due to complications from the fire, and on top of that, another 8 were seriously harmed with burns and other fire-related issues, but thankfully those 8 survived. So in total, 11 people died because of this fire that Roger Dean lit. But I guess you're wondering how police came to the conclusion that Roger Dean was the one that lit this fire. Basically, CCTV footage showed Roger Dean exiting the ward that the first fire started in just after it started. CCTV also shows Roger holding this yellow bag throughout the whole incident. Even when he's trying to help clients or residents evacuate, he's still like awkwardly holding on to this yellow bag. On top of this, he insisted to the firefighters while the fire was happening that he needed to go back into the building, into the meds room, to collect 2 little blue meds books that had all the meds information documented in them. And he actually got escorted back into the building to get these meds books. And not long after this, at about 6:10, Dean leaves the scene on foot. He actually did an interview right before he left, and looking back, it's kind of crazy because there's one part that really sits funny with me. It's this part where he says something along the lines of, oh, you know, we managed to get most people out, or something like that. And it's just so crazy because I really believe that if you were someone who had just witnessed something as traumatic as your place of work burning down, and you knew that people were in there that didn't survive, I just feel like the first thing you would say wouldn't be, oh, at least we got mostly everyone out. Like, you know, you would be so upset and probably traumatized by the fact that people had literally died in there. But once Roger got home, according to his boyfriend, he ripped up those little blue books, the ones he insisted on going back into the burning building to get. And then he told his boyfriend that he needed to go back to the nursing home, to which his boyfriend offered to give him a lift there. So Dean, the boyfriend, drove Roger Dean back to the hospital, or sorry, the residential facility. So Roger stayed at the residential facility until around midday, when he was taken to a local hospital to be assessed for damage to his lungs from the smoke. Police were pretty sus of him straight away, and by 2 p.m. they had taken him to the local police station for questioning. And that night, Dean admitted to the police that he had lit those fires. He admitted that he had stolen a worker's lighter to do it, and he said in his police interview that he didn't think the fires would get so big, and he claimed that Satan had told him to do it. With this confession, police then were able to search Roger's home on the 21st of November, where they found a whole bunch of pills. They found endone pills, Xanax, and Kapanol tablets, amongst others. They also found 20 prescriptions in Roger's name. Dean was charged with 11 counts of murder and 8 counts of recklessly causing grievous bodily harm. And in 2013, on the 27th of May, Roger pleaded guilty to all charges, which prevented a lengthy trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I wanted to name the victims as well, as I felt like they deserved recognition, and I also found a few photos of some of them. So for the ones that I have photos of, I will include them on the screen now with their names. But the first victim was a lady by the name of Alma Smith, who was 73. She was one of the 3 who died on the scene straight away when Roger lit that fire. The second lady was Dorothy Sterling, who was 80, and she was one of the ladies who was actually in that room where Roger lit the second fire, and she also died on the scene. The next lady was Dorothy Wu, who was 85, who was again sleeping in that room where Dean started the fire, and she died at the scene. The 8 people that died later on because of issues due to the fire were Werner Wiebeck, 83, Cesar Gaelia, 82, I really hope I said his name right, Neil Tidge Valke, 90, and I'll include a photo here of her daughter. This is her daughter. I just thought this photo was so sad. She's the lady in the middle, and she said that she feels lost and very lonely without her mother. The next lady was Lola Bennett, who was 86 and died in hospital. Then there was Doris Becky, who was 96. She'd beaten breast cancer twice, Doris, but sadly succumbed to her injuries in the wake of the fire. Then Ella Wood, 97, died from injuries sustained in the fire. Reginald Green, 87, died in hospital after the fire. And I thought this photo was so nice of him. I feel like he must be an American. I don't know. And then the last person was Urbana Alipio, I hope I said that name right, who was 79 and also died from injuries sustained in the fire. After this incident with Roger, a lot changed in aged care. Firstly, sprinkler systems became mandatory in residential facilities. On top of this, those S8 meds are just under even more of a lock and key. I remember one time at my work we had S8 meds and they needed to be counted upon entry and exit of my facility. You could only ever administer them with another person, never by yourself, and stuff like that. But yeah, that basically brings me to the end of this video. I'm so glad that Roger Dean will live the rest of his life in prison. He 100% deserves that. And yeah, it's just a really sad case. I hope you guys found it interesting listening to this one though. Please comment below if you have any questions about anything or you just want to comment on any parts of this case. But thank you so much for watching, you guys. It means so much to me. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye, you guys.